desert air tasted like copper and regret. Lieutenant Daniel Cross pressed his back against the crumbling wall of the compound, his rifle hot in his hands, and wondered how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. 48 hours ago, he'd been sitting in a clean briefing room in Kandahar, confident in his team and their mission. Now, 3 of his men were dead, the objective had disappeared, and the Taliban fighters closing in from every direction knew exactly where they were. Someone had betrayed them, and Cross was beginning to suspect he knew who. The mission had seemed straightforward, almost insultingly simple for a unit of their caliber. Alpha Team, 8 Special Forces operators with a combined 40 years of combat experience, was tasked with extracting a CIA intelligence officer from a remote village near the Pakistani border. The officer, callsign Mockingbird, had been embedded with local tribal leaders for 6 months, gathering intelligence on weapons smuggling routes. But something had spooked him. His last transmission, garbled and desperate, indicated he'd uncovered information that made him a target. Command wanted him out, fast. Cross remembered the briefing officer's face, smooth and expressionless, as he laid out the operation. Simple extraction, gentlemen, in and out before sunrise. The asset will be waiting at the designated location. Local resistance should be minimal. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, Cross's second-in-command, had shifted in his seat, his instincts already prickling. Webb was a 20-year veteran who'd served in every godforsaken corner of the Middle East. He knew when something felt wrong. "What's the asset's real name?" Webb had asked. "Need to know basis, Sergeant," the briefing officer replied, too quickly. "Your job is extraction, not interrogation." That should have been the first warning. But Cross was young, eager to prove himself. After his recent promotion, he'd ignored Webb's skeptical glance and nodded his acceptance. They'd deployed at 0200 hours, flying low over mountain ridges in a Black Hawk that shuddered with every gust of wind. The insertion went smoothly, too smoothly, Cross would later realize. They'd fast roped into a dried riverbed, 2 kilometers from the target village, moving silently through terrain that could hide 1,000 enemies. The night vision turned the world into shades of green and gray, every shadow potentially hostile. The village was a cluster of mud brick structures built into the hillside, ancient and weathered by centuries of conflict. Cross divided his team, 3 men to secure the perimeter, the rest with him to locate Mockingbird. They'd been given precise coordinates, a specific building in the village's eastern quarter. As they approached, Cross noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The village was too quiet. No dogs barking, no generators humming, no signs of the life that even sleeping communities couldn't fully suppress. "Command, Alpha 1, Cross whispered into his radio. "Village appears abandoned, requesting guidance." Static, then a voice he didn't recognize. "Proceed to objective. Asset is waiting." Webb caught Cross's arm, his grip urgent. "Sir, this is wrong. We should abort." But orders were orders, and Cross had been trained to follow them. They entered the designated building, rifles raised, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. In the back room, lit by a single oil lamp, they found him. The man who called himself Mockingbird sat cross-legged on a thin mat, his hands clasped in his lap, completely calm, despite the armed men surrounding him. He was younger than Cross expected, maybe 30, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent too long in hard places. But his eyes were what caught Cross's attention. They were empty, devoid of the fear or relief you'd expect from someone being rescued. "You're late," Mockingbird said, his voice carrying an accent Cross couldn't quite place. "We're here to extract you," Cross replied, scanning the man for weapons. "Let's move. We have a narrow window." Mockingbird smiled, and something in that smile sent ice through Cross's veins. "Extract me, Lieutenant. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Before Cross could respond, the world exploded. The walls of the building erupted in gunfire from 3 directions simultaneously. Specialist Rodriguez, the team's youngest member, went down in the first seconds, his chest torn open by automatic fire. Corporal Harris took rounds to the leg, screaming as he fell. Webb was already returning fire, his rifle barking in controlled bursts, buying them seconds they desperately needed. "Fall back," Cross shouted, grabbing Harris and dragging him toward the door. But Mockingbird hadn't moved. He sat there, still smiling, as bullets shredded the air around him. Cross's radio crackled with panicked voices. The perimeter team was under attack. The extraction bird had taken RPG fire and was pulling back. They were alone, surrounded, and the mission had been compromised before they'd even arrived. Cross's team fought their way to a partially collapsed building at the village's edge, a defensive position that would buy them time, but not survival. They laid Harris in the corner, Webb already working to stop the bleeding that was soaking through the field dressings. "Talk to me, Lieutenant," Webb said, his hands steady despite the chaos. "What the hell just happened?" Cross shook his head, his mind racing through the possibilities. "They were waiting for us. They knew we were coming, knew exactly when and where." "Mockingbird," Webb concluded, his voice flat with understanding. "He's not an asset, he's the trap." It made terrible sense. The entire mission had been designed to lure them into an ambush. But why? What could justify burning an entire intelligence operation just to kill one Special Forces team? Unless the team itself was the target. Unless someone wanted them dead specifically. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood orange, Cross made contact with a frequency he'd been given for emergencies. A direct line to command that bypassed normal channels. The voice that answered was the same one from the briefing. Cool and professional. "Alpha 1 status were compromised," Cross said, hearing the accusation in his own voice. "The asset is hostile." This was a setup, a pause, just long enough for Cross to hear the truth in the silence. "Lieutenant, you need to complete your mission." "Complete what mission?" Cross demanded. "3 of my men are dead, were pinned down with no extraction. Tell me what's really happening here." The voice on the radio became colder. "The man you call Mockingbird possesses information that cannot be allowed to reach certain parties. Your mission was never extraction, Lieutenant. It was elimination and containment." The words hit Cross like physical blows. They'd been sent to kill an American intelligence officer, not rescue him, kill him. And the ambush, the Taliban fighters surrounding their position, that was the containment. Make sure no one walked away to tell the story. "That's murder," Cross said, his voice shaking with rage. "That's an unlawful order. That's classified necessity." The voice replied, "The asset has committed treason. He's been selling intelligence to hostile forces. This is damage control, Lieutenant. Now complete your mission, or you and your remaining men will be left to the situation you find yourselves in." Webb had been listening on the shared frequency, his face hardening with each word. The other survivors, Sergeant Mitchell and Specialist Torres, looked to Cross with questions in their eyes. Questions he couldn't answer, because the foundation of everything they believed had just cracked beneath them. Cross looked at Harris, barely conscious and losing blood faster than Webb could replace it. He looked at the positions where Rodriguez and the others had fallen. Good men following orders, dying for a lie. "No," Cross said into the radio, the word feeling like both surrender and rebellion. "I won't do it." "Then you're all dead anyway," the voice replied without emotion. "And Lieutenant, we never had this conversation. As far as official records show, Your team engaged enemy forces during a routine patrol. There is no Mockingbird. There is no mission. You simply encountered overwhelming resistance and were lost in action. The radio went silent. Cross turned to find Webb already moving, checking ammunition, repositioning their defensive barriers. The older sergeant met his eyes with something like approval. "About time you stopped following bad orders, sir," Webb said quietly. "Now, we need to figure out how to survive good intentions." They were trapped in a stone building, with limited ammunition, a dying man, and enemy forces that had been paid to ensure no witnesses. The logical move was surrender, hope for prisoner exchange. But Cross knew better. Mockingbird wasn't just an intelligence officer gone rogue. He was evidence of something larger, something that required everyone involved to disappear. As the sun climbed higher, the attacks intensified. The Taliban fighters weren't random militants. They moved with training, with coordination that spoke of professional military experience. Someone had sent contractors, not insurgents. "They're not trying to kill us," Mitchell observed, firing carefully controlled shots from his position. "They're keeping us pinned, waiting for something." That's when Cross understood. They were waiting for air support that would accidentally eliminate both the hostiles and Alpha Team in one surgical strike. Clean, deniable, complete. He pulled out his personal phone. A violation of protocol, but their only remaining option, and did something he'd never thought he'd do. He called a journalist. Sarah Chen answered on the third ring, groggy and confused. Cross had met her 6 months earlier, during an embed program. A veteran correspondent who'd covered conflicts for 2 decades. She'd given him her number, told him to call if he ever had a story that needed telling. This wasn't the kind of story either of them had imagined. "Sarah, I have about 10 minutes before I'm either killed or silenced permanently," Cross said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I need you to record everything I'm about to tell you. Don't ask questions, just record and upload it somewhere. It can't be erased." To her credit, she didn't argue. "Recording. Go." Cross talked. He gave coordinates, names, operational details, everything he could remember about the mission and the orders they'd received. He described Mockingbird, the ambush, the voice on the radio that had condemned them. When he finished, Sarah's voice was shaking. "Daniel, this is treason charges. For you and everyone who hears it." "I know," Cross replied, "but it's also the truth. And truth matters more than my career, more than my life." He ended the call and turned to his team. "I just committed professional suicide, and probably put us all in front of a court-martial. Anyone wants to claim they were following my orders under duress, I'll back you up." Webb laughed, the sound harsh and genuine. "Little late for that, Lieutenant. We're all in this together." What Cross didn't know, what he couldn't know in that moment, was that Sarah Chen was already moving. Within minutes, she'd contacted her editor, who contacted their legal team, who contacted senators on the Intelligence Oversight Committee. The recordings spread through secure channels, like wildfire. In Washington, people Cross had never met were making phone calls, demanding answers, threatening investigations. The voice on the radio, the one that had ordered them to commit murder, belonged to a man who'd spent 20 years building a career undeniable operations, and now that career was disintegrating in real time. Back in the village, Cross heard something that made his heart jump. Helicopters, multiple birds, coming in fast. But these weren't enemy aircraft. They were American, emblazoned with Marine Corps markings. The radio crackled with a new voice, rough and urgent. "Alpha Team, this is Reaper 6. We're coming in hot. Mark your position." Cross couldn't believe it. Someone had sent a rescue force, someone with enough authority to override whatever orders had condemned them. Webb fired a red smoke grenade through the window, the crimson cloud billowing in the morning air. The helicopters didn't hesitate, coming in under fire to establish a perimeter. Marine fast ropers hit the ground, immediately engaging the contractors who'd been sent to kill them. As Cross helped carry Harris to the extraction bird, he saw something that would haunt him forever. Mockingbird, or whoever he really was, standing on a distant rooftop, watching them leave. The man raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a salute or farewell or acknowledgement of a game well played. Then he disappeared into the labyrinth of buildings, taking his secrets with him. The flight back to Kandahar was silent, except for the medics working on Harris. Cross knew what was coming: debriefings, investigations, possibly charges. He'd violated direct orders, compromised operational security, and contacted civilian media during an active mission. By any conventional measure, his career was over. But when they landed, it wasn't MPs waiting for them. It was a colonel Cross had never met, with intelligence oversight credentials, and an expression that suggested he'd seen too much of the ugly side of warfare. "Lieutenant Cross," the colonel said, "you and your team are being placed on restricted status, pending investigation. But I want you to know something. What you did today, refusing that order, making that call, it took more courage than most men show in a lifetime of service." Cross didn't feel courageous. He felt exhausted and angry and confused. What about Mockingbird? What was he really? The colonel's expression darkened. "That's above your clearance, son, but I can tell you this. That man was part of an operation that should never have been authorized. He was selling information, but not to the enemy, to journalists, to human rights organizations, to anyone who would listen to what he'd discovered." Discovered about what? The colonel looked at the sky, the mountains, anywhere but at Cross's face. "About operations like the one you were sent on, black-budget missions that crossed legal and moral lines. He was a whistleblower, Lieutenant, and someone decided the easiest way to handle the problem was to eliminate him and anyone who tried to help him." The implications crashed over Cross like a wave. They'd been sent to murder a man whose only crime was telling the truth. And when Cross had refused, when he'd exposed the order, he'd accomplished what Mockingbird had been trying to do all along. He'd brought the truth into the light. 3 months later, Cross sat in a Senate hearing room, his dress uniform crisp, his hands folded in his lap. The senators looked down at him from their elevated positions, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to hostile. The hearings had been going on for weeks, unraveling a web of unauthorized operations that reached higher than anyone had imagined. The voice on the radio belonged to a man who was now facing criminal charges. Mockingbird, whose real name was Thomas Rivera, had testified via secure video link from an undisclosed location, his testimony corroborating everything Cross had said. When it was Cross's turn to speak, he stood and faced the committee with the same calm he'd shown under fire. "Senators, I was trained to follow orders, to trust my chain of command, to believe that the missions I was sent on served a higher purpose. But I was also trained to uphold the Constitution, to protect American lives, and to maintain the honor of my service. When those two imperatives conflicted, I had to choose. I chose the oath that mattered most." One senator, an older man with military ribbons on his lapel, leaned forward. "Lieutenant, do you understand that your actions have caused significant damage to intelligence operations worldwide?" Cross met his gaze. "Sir, I understand that my actions exposed operations that were already damaging our values and our integrity. I'd make the same choice again. The hearings concluded with mixed results. Some officials were charged, others quietly retired, and the programs that had authorized missions like crosses were officially terminated. Officially being the operative word. Cross knew better than to believe the darkness had been eliminated, only that it had retreated to deeper shadows. He was cleared of wrongdoing, but advised that his career prospects in special forces were limited. No one wanted an officer who'd publicly questioned orders, no matter how justified. Webb, Mitchell, and Torres faced similar unofficial sanctions. They'd done the right thing, and would be punished for it with stalled promotions and distant postings. Harris survived, though he'd never walk without a limp. He took a medical discharge and started teaching at a veterans center, telling young men and women about the importance of moral courage. The others from Alpha Team who died in the ambush were honored in a quiet ceremony. Their families told they'd fallen in combat against enemy forces. Not the whole truth, but more truth than many families of covert operators ever received. Cross found himself assigned to a training battalion stateside, teaching basic infantry tactics to new recruits. It was meant to be a demotion, a punishment disguised as a reassignment. But Cross threw himself into it with unexpected passion. He taught his students about weapons and tactics, yes, but also about moral courage, about the difference between lawful and unlawful orders, about the weight of decisions made under fire. One day, a young private approached him after class, nervous but determined. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Cross nodded. "That situation in Afghanistan, the one from the hearings. If you'd followed the order, if you'd done what they wanted, you'd probably be a major by now. Maybe higher. Was it worth it, throwing away your career?" Cross considered the question, looking past the private to where Webb was running another squad through tactical drills. "Private, I spent years training to be a soldier, learning to shoot, to lead, to survive in impossible situations. But the most important thing I ever learned, I learned in that village. I learned that courage isn't just facing the enemy. It's facing your own command when they're wrong. It's choosing to be court-martialed rather than commit murder. It's understanding that honor matters more than rank." The private nodded slowly, processing. "So it was worth it." Cross smiled, the expression tinged with sadness for what he'd lost and pride for what he'd kept. Every single day. That night, alone in his quarters, Cross received an encrypted email. No sender, no signature, just a few lines of text. "You did what I couldn't. You spoke the truth and survived it. They're still out there, still running operations in the shadows. But because of you, there are limits now. There's oversight. There are people watching. Thank you for your service, Lieutenant. The real kind, Mockingbird." Cross read it 3 times, then deleted it, knowing he'd never forget the words. He'd entered that village, expecting a simple mission. He'd left it understanding that nothing about service, honor, or duty was ever simple. The hardest battles weren't fought against foreign enemies, but against the compromises and corruptions that infected every system, even those designed to protect freedom. Webb found him later, sitting on the steps of the barracks, looking at stars that seemed closer in the clear mountain air, thinking about that day. The older sergeant asked. "Every day," Cross admitted, "wondering if we really changed anything, or if we just made noise that'll be forgotten." Webb sat beside him, the companionable silence of men who'd faced death together. "You know what I learned in 20 years, Lieutenant? Change doesn't happen in explosions. It happens in moments, in choices, in one person deciding that enough is enough, even when it costs them everything." Cross nodded, feeling the truth of it. We can't eliminate the darkness, Webb continued, but we can be the light that makes it visible. That's what you did. That's what we all did. And somewhere, someone who would have been sent on a mission like ours gets to go home instead because we said no. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't victory in any traditional sense, but it was meaning, which might be all any soldier could hope for. Cross thought about the men who died following orders they believed were lawful, about Harris, who would carry his wounds forever, about his own career, permanently marked by his choice, and he thought about the private who'd asked if it was worth it, and all the other young soldiers who needed to know that courage meant more than firing your weapon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness, operations continued that would never be acknowledged. But also somewhere in that darkness, officers and soldiers remembered what happened to Alpha Team, remembered that orders could be questioned, that duty to conscience could supersede duty to command. That was the real legacy, not the charges or the hearings or the damaged careers, but the seed of moral courage planted in every person who heard the story. Cross stood, Webb rising beside him. Tomorrow, there would be more training, more young soldiers to teach, more days of service measured in small actions rather than dramatic missions. Let's get some sleep, Cross said. We've got recruits to train in the morning. Webb smiled. Roger that, sir. As they walked back to the barracks, Cross thought about a question he'd been asked during the hearings. A senator had demanded to know if he considered himself a hero or a traitor. Cross had looked at the committee and said something that had made headlines for a week. Senator, I'm just a soldier who understood that the hardest enemy to face isn't the one shooting at you. It's the one that asks you to compromise everything you believe in. And I'd rather die fighting that enemy than live serving it. Those words had defined him, marked him, cost him the conventional career he'd planned, but they'd also freed him to be something more valuable than a perfect soldier. They'd allowed him to become a good man, and in the end, in the quiet moments when the medals and ranks and official records didn't matter, that was the only measurement that counted, not whether you'd followed every order, but whether you'd kept your soul intact, not whether you'd climbed the hierarchy, but whether you'd stood for something when standing required everything. Cross had learned what few soldiers ever fully understood, that the most important mission wasn't the one handed down from command, it was the one you chose for yourself, the line you drew and refused to cross, the moment when you stopped being a weapon and started being a warrior with wisdom to match your training. That was the lesson he would spend the rest of his career teaching. That was the truth worth any cost. That was what made a soldier not just effective, but honorable. And honor, he'd learned in blood and betrayal, was the only thing worth dying for or living for.